We are live. Hello, everybody. Another great day today. I am here. I have a special guest. I have Blaine Elliot. He is the CTO of a blockchain startup. Are you a startup now, or are you guys past that? What would be the right term?
I'd say we're a startup. I mean, there's organized chaos, therefore we are a startup.
Blockchain startup. Are you a startup now, or are you guys? Sorry, I've got some feedback. Give me a sec. Sorry about that. I had some feedback or something weird going on. No, but that's great. So, yeah, I mean, and Blaine's a guy that, you've been in the space, it seems like, for quite some time. You were telling me earlier that you got into Bitcoin back in 2011 or 2012 is?
Yeah, and I think I'm always interested in what's the bleeding edge of technology, like gadgets, what's happening next. And, so when Bitcoin came out, it was this interesting thing, where I was just happy to talk about it with friends at night saying, hey, there's this weird thing called Bitcoin where, yeah, you kind of replace your money with digital currency. And, it's always been a hobby of mine. But even back then, I had no idea people would take off and run with it to where it is today. And, at the time, my full-time job was being a software engineer. And so that's what I spent my time doing. But during lunch breaks and stuff, I'd be talking about Bitcoin with all my coworkers and whatnot. So
how'd you get into this? Did you just read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper? Did you hear this from a friend? How'd you get started? I mean, I always love learning about how people fell into this stuff.
So it was tough. Back then in 2011, there's a site called Slashdot, and Slashdot was like the de facto news source for tech information. Before that, it was kind of Dig. Now it's kind of Reddit. But you go to these places, like Y Combinator has their news. Y Combinator, that's where you find news. But they're just recurring news things that come up with all these geeky tech publications. And Bitcoin is one that came up a lot in 2011. So it just kind of made sense to explore it. And plus, back in 2011, it was doing very, very weird things. It was like, just the curiosity to figure out what was out there, just kind of drove me to look into it. And that's kind of like what got me started. I mean, nothing professionally, like I said, just a hobby. But certainly like these days, there are a lot more news outlets out there. So it's really hard to filter your news sources to figure out what's important and what's noise.
Wow. That's pretty great. Now, you got in at 2011. So being a software guy, did you kind of tear dissect what the blockchain was about and get your own little mining rig set up and,
The thing is, I got my Bitcoins and I used them, and, I was never into the mining thing. I was into I was never into the way to make money on Bitcoin. I always thought of it as a utility. And, even back then, it wasn't like, Bitcoin's going to grow and you can make money off it. It was like Bitcoin's going to become part of your life, so you should pay attention. And I think the conversation's it's kind of going back and forth at this point where there are a lot of investors in the space and whatnot. But, it was always a technical thing for me. I wish that my professional life coincided. Actually, I almost got a job with Ripple 5 years ago. And it's funny that I decided to work for Lyft instead because I was like, I don't know, man, this whole cryptocurrency thing, it's fun, but I mean, Lyft has got a better business model.
Well, I mean, Lyft did pretty well. I don't know if you were an early employee of Lyft, but
yeah, Lyft is doing great. And it's just, but do I want to put my family's well-being, into the world of cryptocurrency? I mean, now it kind of makes sense, in retrospect, but I wasn't willing to test my wife's livelihood to start working for Ripple.
Wow. So now when you first got into Bitcoin, so you didn't mind, you just those were back in the days, exchanges didn't quite exist. So you had to go down where the special firmware, put the keys on, all that sort of stuff. And you So you basically just bought some and like used them for kicks and grins? Is that kind of how you got started?
I shared them with friends, and like I think I bought a coffee in Italy once. Back then, in order to acquire bitcoins, they had some services where it's kind of like going to Craigslist, and you would have to hunt people down that would be willing to sell them, and you buy them. That was one way. You have third parties that were authenticated as people that can verify your transaction, because they don't want to get ripped off. In order to get money into the system, I think I went to Walmart. I bought some like cash credit cards, and then they have numbers on the back that you scratch off, and you call a phone number, and it puts money into the system. So it was really weird, and it was really painful to put your fiat dollars into crypto. I mean, you'd have to go to the ATM, get cash, get this special credit card, go onto this phone system. It was a yeah, and part of the way, like, you didn't even want to spend it because, like, dude, it's such a pain in the ass to get my Bitcoin. I don't want to spend these things.
So you did all that work in 2011. Back then, what was the price of a Bitcoin like?
It was trading between like $2.50 and like $15 back and forth.
Okay.
There was a downturn in the market where I think it went down from like 15 down to like below 10. This thing for like a year or so. So back then nobody talked about making money on Bitcoin. They were all talking about getting out of it because people are losing money.
Yeah, well, that's classic hodl, right? But okay, so you did that, and then what? What was the most expensive pizza or cup of coffee that you bought, right? Now looking back.
Oh God, I don't even want it. It's troubling. It's troubling. It's a nice Porsche, but okay.
That's funny. Okay, so you're an early Bitcoin guy. So I'll tell you a funny story. And I think part of the fun always goes back into, with new technology, everyone always makes bad decisions. So do you remember Paycoin?
No.
Paycoin, Go Miners?
I don't know. Sorry.
Don't know them? Okay, it's no big deal. That's actually kind of how I got into the business. This was probably 2000. It was about 2011, 2012-ish, actually. Where I really looked at it. I'd known the guy since 2007, but they were one of the first insta mining operations. Okay. So that was a negative thing, So he recently pled guilty and got indicted for I think like a $10 million worth of fraud or whatever. But it is what it is on that side. So fast forward now, you're obviously you're a software developer or you're a tech guy?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're at Lyft, you're kind of doing Bitcoin or blockchain for fun or just kind of screwing around on that. Now, how do you go from that to, because like you said, you walked away from an opportunity with Ripple, 5 years ago to now being all in, right? So how does that happen?
Yeah. Okay. So it's funny. I mean, it happened very gradually. But my career has been spent on, Silicon Valley startups. And Lyft is one of the many companies that I've been at. And I relocated from San Francisco down to Santa Barbara just to get a better lifestyle, and started working for Lyft. Oh, no, sorry, that was for Linda. Linda got acquired by LinkedIn. LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft. And so, most recently I was at Microsoft, and like probably this time a year ago, some friends and I were kicking around the idea of, doing something on blockchain technology, and, what is a void in the market that hasn't been met yet? And, we've been investors, we've been users of the space. We're like, what can we do differently that people aren't doing yet? And, the topic of daily fantasy sports came up. And, we've kind of been sports fans, and it's a really niche space. It's pretty tech heavy. But we started developing a platform with it about this time last year. I mean, not even thinking it would be anything serious. But I will tell you something about side projects is once we put money into them, they start to become more serious. Once you put more and more money in them, they become so serious that you can't really turn your back. This is one of those times where, it just slowly eroded. It eroded my professional life to the point where, it just became a no-brainer. and I'm putting my I'm putting my professional life, into my hobby, and I think that I think at first I had no idea it would snowball into what it is today. Um,
Now, are you talking blockchain or are you talking about the fantasy sports?
I'm talking about TokenDraft. I had no idea
Oh,
TokenDraft is snowball into the project it is today.
and just so people know, can you maybe talk a little bit about TokenDraft? So, I mean, what is it? Are you like a DraftKings, but for the blockchain? Is that the way to look at it, or?
Kings and FanDuel for blockchain, and it's a space that already has some competitors in it, but we're talking about a sliver of a multi-billion-dollar market. And it's a $10 billion industry. It goes 12% year over year. And there's so much money that's being spent on running this organization and advertising, and it doesn't take into the economy the ability to do peer-to-peer financial transactions, which is kind of what blockchain is there for, is to audit peer-to-peer financial transactions. And so, it makes sense to me from a technical perspective to put these kind of features on top of something like blockchain technology. Like I said, this started out as a hobby, became increasingly more serious as the platform became more well developed. And right now we're a team of probably 18 people, and I'm really happy with the results. And it's one of these industries in blockchain that needs to be served. And people talk about the need for blockchain to redefine humanity and make our lives better, which makes sense. I think as a whole, blockchain technology is doing that. And then there's a myriad of small projects like TokenDraft that are just a sliver of the entire ecosystem. And from my perspective, if we can make the industry of daily fantasy sports better as a whole by moving on to blockchain technology, then we've done two things. We've improved the lives of all these DFS users, and we've improved the ecosystem of blockchain. So that's more or less the motivation. I'll go ahead there and answer some questions that you may have.
No, this is actually interesting because usually, on these, I meet all sorts of people, right? And it's clear to me that you're obviously a tech guy and you seem to know your way around how the technology works. And in my case, I'm a reformed tech guy. So I used to be a tech guy. Now I have gotten more into sentiment and emotions. So it still is, conceptually speaking, I still have to break things down, but I like having technical conversations. So let's actually dive into this, because I think one of the things that irks me, and I'm sure, you as an actual programmer probably gets, I'm sure it might, really raise eyebrows, is right now, right, we've got Long Island blockchain, we've got Riot blockchain. I mean, blockchain has become a branding term. And there's the basic concept of, do you actually need a blockchain for this? Or would a normal database work better? Or are you just doing that to pump up your, to sell more widgets or whatever the heck you're doing? So if it's okay, I would love to let's talk about this problem you're solving, right? Because you've looked at the market, specifically fantasy sports. Right. You believe there is some sort of issue that cannot be handled with the current situation, and that your problem or your solution, this TokenDraft, is something that is uniquely positioned. And the fact that you've kind of quit your job and done this and put some money in yourself means you got to believe, right? So,
So, you're right. And, I wish I can come up with a formula for, why a project should or shouldn't be on blockchain. Look at the reasons why blockchain, makes itself special and valuable. And that is, the ability to audit transactions, the ability to be transparent, the ability to send micropayments. And so you want to look at an ecosystem where, you have financial transactions that need to be audited. You want to add transparency. You want to be able to do micropayments. And you also look at the cost for blockchain technology and, whether or not you can apply some of those benefits to it. And, DFS is one of those things. And some of that.
And just for clarification, because we are kind of, some people might not be as technical. By DFS, do you mean distributed file system, or are you meaning a different acronym?
Sorry, daily fantasy sports.
Oh, daily fantasy sports. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you are technical. That's good.
Yeah, I
So
mean, just so you know, I mean, I started. I was a Perl CGI guy back in high school. In the mid
oh gosh,
'90s.
yeah,
I learned that way. I then actually started in telecom. So I've also done some engineering. So I've laid out chips. I've laid out hardware boards. I've done low-level programming. I then became a programmer. I built a payment gateway. So full stack. Built it on SQL Server, WCF, and C Sharp. Wrote the SDLC. Went through PCI Level 1 certification. I mean, so I'm definitely a little rusty because I haven't been actively programming since probably 2012,
right.
2011, outside of scripting. There's scripting and there's actual development,
Right.
but so I'm gonna be a little weaker when it comes to like the newest things and stuff like that. But I know enough to be dangerous, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay, so let's talk about TokenDraft and daily fantasy sports. And daily fantasy sports is a system it's a contest between multiple people where they enter somewhat of a race, and it begins by users. And I have to give you some background into daily fantasy sports to understand what I'm going to talk about. So here's my short spiel about anybody who needs to know what DFS is about. Daily fantasy sports is that it's a contest for multiple players where you select winners based on somebody who accumulates points. And so for anybody not familiar with DFS, there are companies like FanDuel, DraftKings, which are the big ones that you may have heard of. Users select their ideal imaginary team, such as a football team, by they pick, their best quarterback, the best running back, the best defense, and so forth. Users are restricted by the amount of money they could spend on their players. And so, you can't pick the best players at every position and fill your team. You're going to run out of money. So you have to be selective about who you pick. Now, after users select their team, they enter this contest, and users are awarded points based on on-field performance of a specific player. So in this example, we're using the NFL. People select their teams before the week starts. These teams play their games over the course of the weekend. And then you look up, the number of yards, carries, points, and so forth. And, that dictates the points that you get out of the contest. The contest ends. You rank the people in that contest. The people that did the best, are the ones that get paid the most. Usually the top 3 players are in the money. So that's the industry of daily fantasy sports. In order to enable that industry, there are a lot of statistics that have to be pulled up in real time to generate the contest. At least the results of the contest. There are financial transactions on the back end that have to be tracked to keep track of winners and so forth. And it's those financial transactions that we could be putting on the blockchain, and users could have immediate transparency about where their funds are. There's also the question of what does it mean when I want to receive my winnings from a contest that I've won? So, for example, today, if I won a contest and want to get a check, somebody has to recognize that I have positive money in my account. They have to take that money and put it to a check. That check has to go to the mail. That mail has to go into my mailbox and I have to pick it up and deposit in my bank. We were talking a process that could last about a week. And blockchain is one of those technologies that solves that problem immediately by giving players immediate access to funds. So that's one aspect of where this industry could benefit by putting out blockchain. There are others so far as the cost benefit as well. Hold on, I gotta drink my water. So another problem in DFS is players are asked to spend anywhere between 1% and 15% to enter a contest. And so if a player enters a contest, immediately the company that's managing that contest is going to take somewhere, it's about 11% out of everybody's entries to run that contest. And, we think that's pretty prohibitive, and we want to bring that down to 0. And we want to enable peer-to-peer transactions for these people that are entering these contests. And so that's one of the ways we want to shake up the DFS industry, so to speak.
Okay, so if I were to summarize it, maybe in my simple layman's terms, the problem or what exists today is because if I want to create a pool, whether it's NCAA pool, right? Because March Madness is gearing up, or anything, I need to link up with 5 or 10 or 20 other people, and there's a trust issue because if I don't have enough people in my office, cool. Like I want to play over the internet because that's more fun, and to pay for that trust, whether it's like Yahoo Sports or DraftKings or whoever the heck it is, I pay on average an 11% fee for managing that, so that like my stuff doesn't get stolen, or that there's no cheaters or things like that occur.
Right.
So by putting that onto the blockchain, you're doing that in a distributed manner, and you will remove the need to have a third party like DraftKings in play. And ideally by now now is this a token economy play, or is this, I guess I could see it just as like a blockchain corporate play, because a distributed database makes sense for a lot of these micro type transactions. Or are you actually building a token economy where you're going to try to capture the value of the trust, or whatever you want to call it, in the protocol?
Right. Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, from the user's perspective, it's something where the user can enter the system for trust. From the concept of TokenDraft, it's a token economy play, because we want to increase the value of our token by increasing the demand for the token.
Okay, so there's some sort of smart contract that the user enters into. They have the draft picks or whatever you want to call it, and it'll be captured between the smart contract and the blockchain and the immutable ledger. There's no cheating allowed, and the funds will be released per whatever the rules of the smart contract are.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the platform that we've been designing, and I think it helps with blockchain technology in a sense where it's democratic. It's rule-based, and it's easy to audit.
So the interesting question, I guess, in the world of fantasy sports, I know a little bit about that because I've been in media and marketing for the last, 6-7 years. And I would say the fantasy sports guys, like, they spent 70 to 80% of their revenue, like, they're just marketing organizations. Like, all they do is market, right? So why, I guess the operational aspect of it is like of that 11%,
right.
I would make a point that the operations side is 2% of it, and the marketing, the ads, the pretty girls that get hired, the boisterous guys, that's like 8% of the 11% on that front.
And that's true. And, the thing is, DraftKings needs to do that so they compete with FanDuel. And FanDuel needs to do that so they compete with DraftKings. So, if we wanted to be the king of this $10 billion industry, then you're right. We'd probably have some issues when it comes to our marketing budget. But we're not aiming to be, the giant in this space. We're just aiming to disrupt it for the people that are interested in knowing the benefits of putting this on the blockchain. And we're also entering this space as a way to create an online gaming platform that allows us to enter in other industries, but we're going to start with DFS. So, to speak to your point about competing with, DraftKings and FanDuel with these large budgets, you're right. It's going to be near impossible to do that. But if we can convert the small enthusiasts that are in DFS, daily fantasy sports, and blockchain, and we could ride the momentum of blockchain as it becomes more a part of our daily lives, then I think we're going to be in a good position to enable a lot of growth for the company and for token economics.
Okay. Well, this isn't a marketing discussion. Let's get back into the tech on that front.
It's a very good point. And, there are the daily fantasy sports industry it's pretty big, and it's much bigger than what you see with just FanDuel and DraftKings, especially when you look at the global industry.
Well, you factor that. You factor in like horse betting or like chicken fighting in like third world countries, or dog fighting. I mean, They're back.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I mean, daily fantasy sports is a small niche, and it's called gaming, and that's the reason why it's legal in most states, or not most, 20, or is because more than 50% of the outcome is determined by skill and not luck. Now, this works for daily fantasy sports. Online gambling, when you're talking about sports betting and so forth, that's obviously a game of luck, and that's largely outlawed out of every state except Nevada. However, I will say that there are laws that are going through, or there are court cases that are going through our judicial system right now that could be changing that, and it could open up sports betting for every state in the U.S. Starting with New Jersey, and this is something we're keeping a close eye on. It's something that we think that would fit well into the platform that we're creating. But it's a bit of a tangent, and it's a bit of a marketing roadmap, product roadmap thing that's in the distance. But
No, definitely. But let's actually, I kind of got sideways on the marketing side. I really want to dive into the tech. And you mentioned you don't really have a framework, but our background these days is primarily on the research side. So, we research tons and tons of these blockchain companies. Yep. So if it's okay, I've got like basically, a list that I start with internally when I look at things to saying, hey, is this a qualified blockchain product or not? Can I ask you some questions?
Go for it.
Cool. So first thing is, we basically call it the 7 or 8 point list. What makes it qualified? The first question is, does your project need a database? I think that answer is pretty apparent. You want to talk about that in terms of yes or no? I would say yeah, right?
Yes, we need a database. Yeah.
Exactly. So you definitely need a database because you're tracking results, you're tracking people's wins, you're tracking their losses, you're tracking the performance of their teams. That's all. That's a database ledger type thing. The second question is specifically in the database world, right? There is the relational database that we know that companies like Oracle, with MySQL and Microsoft have spent, billions, of maybe not even trillions, and years of time and effort developing. The second thing of what makes a project needing a blockchain is the concept of multiple writers. Because specifically, as any technical person knows, a distributed database is not going to perform as well as a centralized database.
Right.
So you want to talk about the concept of why the necessity of multiple writers is critical or beneficial to your particular project?
Yeah, okay. Now you're speaking to a capacity issue with multiple writes at the same time.
Well, I'm talking out of capacity side. I'm talking about a database, a distributed database perspective. For example, you can run a database, like if you think about it, if you need a database, the question is it just one person always writing to it? Like, for example, if I'll use the example of a payment gateway, right? All transactions go through Visa or MasterCard, so they're just going to keep writing their own database. There's no need for a peer-to-peer type of a transaction versus one might say the credit reporting agency, where they're like a centralized database. But if you think about it, you've got multiple writers coming in because like the housing guy is going to write your credit records on there. The loan payment guy is going to write the credit report stuff. The car payment guy. Do you see what I mean? So
right.
That's the question on the blockchain side that I always like to look at is the database a scenario where multiple people, entities, organizations will be contributing data to a point versus why not just put it all through one central guy and just have it write it that way instead of distributing it over a blockchain?
So, okay, interesting. All right, so I think there's a need, to answer the question, there's the application layer, and TokenDraft itself, at least in the first version, is not going to be the app. It's just going to exist in a physical location. It's not going to exist in the blockchain. Mm-hmm. So we also need to have the concept of a private database to run the application itself. Now, on the other hand, we want to have a public ledger database that gives transparencies for all these different users. Are we going to have concurrency issues? Probably not. I don't think we're going to do that much volume to where we have to worry about that as an issue. I think that we do want a distributed database in the sense where we want to give users the transparency to see what's happening with their transactions. So I'm not sure if that answers that question, but for TokenDraft, we need a little bit of both. We need the private database to run the application, and then we want a public public ledger database to give our users the transparency that we want to give.
See, I think, and I'm not really in the place to, take free advice for what it's worth, but I believe a blockchain for gaming could be interesting. And the need for multiple writers, if you look at it from maybe a KYC perspective or a user record perspective, where they can take their, I don't know if does gambling track record or winning track record help you or hurt you? Like if you could if you looked at it as a platform where like DraftKings could throw their stuff on the ledger, FanDuel could throw their stuff on the ledger, and then also cross venues from say sports to gaming to all sorts of odds and stuff like that. There I could see a interesting possibility or probability for a distributed database play, right? Because the guy would want to be able to take his winnings or take his records from application A to application B to application C, on that side. Now, I'm not honestly sure what your roadmap is. Maybe it calls for that, maybe it doesn't. On the single side, it's like, I you know what I mean? I'm a little conflicted. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, yeah, and some of that comes down to engineering cost. I mean, we can't build a Ferrari of daily fantasy sports applications. We have to build something that's reasonable, something that's going to not be cost prohibitive.
Oh, so you're saying you don't have a white paper that gives you a $2 billion market cap valuation? I'm kidding.
So, there's a lot of things that I would like to do. And, sometimes you got to stop, just as a business owner, you got to ask yourself, why are you doing these things? What's the cost of doing them? How much value are you adding? And, there's certain aspects about implementing with blockchain that, some of those aspects of implementation are probably less valuable than they really need to be. And for a startup, you have to look at those. You have to look at those trade-offs.
Are you guys? Well, here's an interesting one. Are you building on like existing platform like an Ethereum or Neo or Lisk or one of those things, or are you gonna do your own blockchain?
No, we're trying to leverage ERC20, and so the reason we use Ethereum is because, and again, there are better blockchains out there that we could probably look into. We could spawn our own. But the benefit by using something like Ethereum is that you're taking advantage of thousands of open source developers. You're using a product that other people have already used in the past, and so you can trust it. And we don't want our core competency to be creating blockchain technology. We want to be creating apps on top of blockchain. And we wouldn't want to make that mistake. We wouldn't want to differentiate ourselves, in such that manner. So. And
that's an interesting conversation, and maybe let's go on this path. We actually, for one of our projects, we happen to have some initiatives in the cannabis space, marijuana, and specifically, we were trying to solve a problem, or it's still ongoing. We're trying to solve a problem around traceability, and in this case, it's more of a supply chain blockchain play, where it's like you've got existing organizations that are producing stuff. You've got, software that's been deployed in, hundreds of dispensaries and stuff like that. And it's a matter, it becomes more of a branding. I guess it is kind of branding, but there's a tech aspect where today, cannabis out there, it's kind of, it's almost like Upton saying, well, it's not even, it is, if not worse than, the days of Upton St. Clair. I don't know if you get that illusion or not. And, the meat industry. For anyone who doesn't know, Upton St. Clair was basically like a social activist and an investigative reporter in the 1920s who really did some deep diving into how meat was packaged. And many people credit him for starting the whole Food and Drug Administration. But back then in the 1920s, people would just, they just processed their meat. And the difference between grade A, B, and C was just a sticker and pricing. So it was all the same stuff, and everything on that front. So the issue with cannabis today is from a growing perspective, there's a whole process. And in terms of how you cultivate the plant, even from, not even just from the genetics, but from the actual cultivation process, right? If it's watered properly, if it's not, if drought hits it or something like that, that affects the chemical composition of the product, which ultimately affects the user experience from the end product perspective.
Okay.
And, you know, in a situation where you're hoping for a particular chemical combination to ingest to then change your chemical reaction, having consistency is pretty critical. It's like drugs, right? If you're going to get penicillin, you don't want one time the penicillin working and the other time it not. You know, I mean, the antibiotic's got to work. So they're trying to work. We were trying to solve the traceability problem on that, you know, because a blockchain makes perfect sense, right? You know, you can track it from start to finish from the growing side. You know, nowadays people have automation, they have controls. You then go to the packaging aspect, and you go to the branding aspect, and literally you could have it on the side of a bar with a QR code and an app, and you could just literally scan it to just verify that everything is good or not good on the plant. So in the process of putting that whole thing together, we actually took a look at Ethereum. We actually took a look at Neo. We looked at, you know, all these platforms. And in this scenario, because it was an existing company where they would deploy it regardless, like if it doesn't go public or, you know, no money is raised, they'll still do it. It was actually too risky to go upon another project versus just building their own, because they didn't want to be beholden to whatever Ethereum standards came about, or a POS switch, or, you know, a consensus node crashing or anything on that front.
Right.
So
I mean, it's a pretty long conversation to say you're scared of Ethereum, but I totally get it. This is still leading edge technology. As much as we like to think that Ethereum and Bitcoin and, you know, so forth, whatever Neo, I mean, nobody even heard of Neo 2 years ago.
no, exactly.
You know, so, you know, that being apprehensive, you know, totally makes sense, and I get it.
Yeah. So I'll just put this out there. We just released our blockchain on GitHub, and I'd love for you to take a look at it.
Cool. Yeah, for sure.
So this is something, we didn't fork it. We got inspired, obviously, by Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of these other codes, but we wrote it ourselves, you know, and we're planning on open sourcing it. So it's not just something we're going to keep it, you know, and if other people want to use it, you know, all the better. But sorry, I got a little aside. Didn't mean to kind of literally pitch you on our blockchain, but it just came up, you know, because of your talks. Okay, so you guys are building on the ERC20, which makes sense. So the next step, okay, so question number 2 I ask is there multiple writers? The third question is the absence of trust, right? So if we have multiple writers on the database, then is there a need for some trusted entity to make sure that the writers all play with each other? And in the world of fantasy sports, you know, that's pretty apparent, right? You want a smart contract to enforce, you know, the actual thing. So between absence of trust and then disintermediation, that makes sense. Then the question is, you know, transaction interaction, right? You know, while blockchains make sense for databases that are shared by multiple writers who don't trust each other and who will modify that database directly, ultimately a blockchain shines when there's the interaction of these transactions between multiple writers.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
So we're talking about the need to, you know, I mean, the thing is, these problems are more or less solved today. I think putting these application transactions on top of blockchain will give the user an added sense of security. You know, I'm not sure if it's a requirement, you know, but I could say yes. So, you know, ask the question one more time so I make sure I'm getting this correctly. But you're talking about the trust of multiple writers writing to the blockchain.
Well, there's trust, but then there's stacking on top of it, right? So going back to the credit profile example, I've got a credit record, me as an individual with a credit record, and then me as an individual, I have multiple writers. Like I have, in my case, right, I might have a home mortgage, I might have a credit card, I might have an auto loan, and I might have, I don't know what else gives me credit. Personally, I actually don't have anything, so my credit's really simple. But I have 4 different sources that are going to, write to my credit report.
Yeah.
And ultimately, my credit score is the amalgamation of these 4 sources writing together and building a better ledger and a better profile and a history of me. You see what I mean? To then give me actionable data, and putting that on the blockchain instead of keeping it in Experian or Equifax for me is kind of interesting, especially when there's personal credit scores. I think there's a great application of that on the business side because, it's between Dun and Bradstreet and the Better Business Bureau and all that. I mean, I didn't want to go there in terms of.
I think it adds value. I don't think it's going to move the needle to cause a user to switch from like a DFS platform that's traditional versus a DS platform that's on blockchain.
Yeah,
but,
makes sense.
I
guess in your guys' case, it's still
either.
Yeah, you guys are still kind of micro, when it comes from that.
I mean, it might. I mean, some people are probably going to care. Most wouldn't, but some people probably would. As enthusiasts like yourself, you probably think it's an ideal solution. Yeah.
Oh, to do, I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest. Even though I like the blockchain, I am actually probably, when it comes to personal usage, unless I have to, I'm happy to stay with like tried and true technologies. You see what I mean? So then in the case of your project, it's really a branding thing where it's like, oh, it's a blockchain and it's kind of cool. So my stuff's on a blockchain. Is your stuff public though? Because I don't know if I'd want my fantasy sports.
No, I mean and so this is something that we're debating with today. The product roadmap is, what are we going to put out there on, the ether, or for people to witness and audit. And I think with cost not being an issue, then all contests, all rules for contests will be put out there for a user to interact with and see what's happening. But again, there's a cost for putting all this stuff out there. I think there are going to be multiple versions about the TokenDraft platform where it slowly evolves into the ideal platform that we want it to be, where as much as possible is putting the blockchain, but as a first version, we're just putting the financial ledger information out there. Now the information about smart contracts, that opens up a big conversation about the cost to create these dynamic smart contracts and so forth. And maybe it's something that we're going to tackle in the future. I think some of that's going to be dictated by users. Some of the product features we get will be dictated by users about how we prioritize them.
That's an actually interesting debate that we're struggling with right now. I would love to get your opinion on this in terms of what goes on the public blockchain and what even goes on the smart contract.
Yeah, right? And if you ask somebody running an ICO, they're going to be like, well, it all needs to be out there. And you're like, well, you're just saying that because you want to justify the existence of your project. You got to look at it from a user's perspective. What is going to influence a user to choose your project over something else? Some features are going to be very influential, some of them aren't. And, I think, for us to put our smart contracts for contests into blockchain, I think that's going to move a needle for some users, but not for many of them. But then again, it could be wrong. I mean, we have the option in front of us to do it. So it depends.
Yeah, I mean, we ran into this problem on 2 sides. So we've also actually, the main project, the marijuana project, is a side thing. The main project is we're looking at financial data and, creating a blockchain for the financial investing space. Yeah. And the challenge that comes up is, you don't want everything, it seems, in a smart contract because there's data or there's an information that occurs that shouldn't be exposed on a smart contract. However, there is the desire to have the concept of the smart contract because the smart contract ensures that the data will always be the same and the quote unquote backend code can't change, right?
Yeah. Hey, I think I have somebody coming in here for a meeting.
Oh, do we have to wrap this up or do you want to pause it?
I mean, I think we're okay. How many questions do we have left or?
Oh, I mean, this isn't even a question thing. Now I'm just kind of wrapping. And
yeah, I mean, until I get kicked out, let's keep on going because I like having these talks.
yeah, okay, yeah, this is fun. So I guess, we've been toying with the idea, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Like, because like there's some, actually, let me go back to the marijuana example. In the marijuana space, from a traceability perspective, there are certain things that, like, specifically there's a database in the government system called Metric, which is a government database. And to access that database and to, run your transaction, you need a private key, on that. And there's no way to really put that private, well, it would be foolish to put your private cryptography, I can't even say it. Basically, it'd be foolish to put your private key in a smart contract for the world to see.
Right.
But if you have your private key as a separate app that's obfuscated from your smart contract, you then run into the problem that, oh, well, I don't know if I can trust the application running the private key because maybe it could change. Do you see what I mean?
I mean, I think at that point, I mean, just because he can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And it's true for engineers when they're developing applications is that, time is not infinite. You have to be able to, assess the cost of what you're going to do and do it smartly such that you aren't wasting your time and slipping deadlines and so forth. And this, I think it speaks to one of those things where you have to ask yourself, is it important? And ultimately your users are going to decide that, your customers are going to decide that, whether or not somebody becomes, somebody that is a, paying customer or somebody that disappears, their decision process is going to dictate whether or not you implement those features. And so, to answer your question, I think you need to outsource, those decision processes to, whoever you think is going to be buying into your product. Do they think it's important? I don't know. I mean, certainly you want security. I think that, the fact that you're obfuscating a private key and another DApp, I think it's something that's going to be glossed over by a user. I think they would appreciate the fact that you're not putting your private key out there in the public space and that this is an acceptable solution to, make it work.
Yeah. No, which makes sense. It's just, that's been an interesting thing. Because what I've noticed is, you've got the public blockchains, and obviously they're saying, throw everything in a smart contract, because just like as you said, the incentives are aligned the other way. Because from the concept of immutability to the fact that, your gas prices for processing a smart contract is always higher than doing a DApp or whatever, like that's where those incentives are aligned. And then you have, I think, the broader market, or I wouldn't say the broader market, you've got the private market, whether it's banks, whether it's businesses, whether it's insurance companies and stuff that could use the blockchain. There might even be applications of what they're doing on a public blockchain, but they're choosing to go the private blockchain route primarily because of, the sensitivity of information or whatever on that side, because that could be a problem. It's not this nirvana that can come up. And ultimately, this sounds corny, but, some sort of public-private integration is probably one of the problems to solve in terms of how do you run things privately while keeping the concept of immutability? Because the minute you start running things on, private DApps, the entire immutability thing goes away because whatever happens on that private DApp stays in the private, it's like Vegas, right? You can't argue on that front. Interesting. So in terms of, looking towards the future and stuff like that, what do you see? I mean, obviously you're coming this from a tech angle, so,
Well, I mean, the tech stuff, it makes sense when you look at, transactions, legibility, trust, security. It makes sense that those industries, such as like splitting up a bill when you're paying for something, can move to the blockchain. The ease of the ability to do microtransactions without having to go through a payment gateway is awesome. Now, from what's happening in the future, I think, first of all, well, a couple things that we shouldn't discount the amount of money that's going into this industry. It's insane. And, for, the success rate of blockchain technologies, it could be low, but some of the ones that do succeed, I think going to be worth having. And, there's also the token economics aspect of it is that blockchain is allowing us to create these democratic financial positions. And one of the examples I give is, assume that you want to buy Exxon gas and you're buying your Exxon gas from an Exxon station with an Exxon token. And you're getting a discount on your Exxon gas because of using your Exxon token. Well, Exxon themselves is able to offer that discount on that gas because Exxon themselves has an Exxon token. And so what's happening with customers when they're buying this gas is that they're increasing the demand for the token. The price of the token is going up, and Exxon is able to offset the cost of that gas by selling their own token. This is a very common thing that's happening within blockchain technologies, and it has the ability to greatly decrease the costs to use expensive services, and it also has the ability to greatly create a democratic environment for people that are involved in some of these massive companies.
So I'm going to actually want to question you on this a little more, because I'm not saying I'm not following you, because I see that trend. But when I see that, it just looks to me as that's just a loyalty and rewards program. Why do I need a blockchain for loyalty? Like, why is that so exciting when I don't discount marketing. I mean, the entire SaaS business was just a recast of an ASP, from 20 years back. But SaaS is sexy, and ASP is like, eh. But like, why wouldn't I just use a royalty? Like, this is a loyalty program.
Right. And, from the user's perspective, where you get a discount for something, I mean, according to the user, it is a loyalty program. And, there are other aspects of it. Like, what about, and I'm just shooting off the hip here, is what about something like Facebook?
Okay.
If in order to, what if somehow you want to do something on Facebook and you bought Facebook stock and you use that Facebook stock to pay for those services? I mean, how would that change the things for users? They would be buying into that platform. Is that a loyalty program? Or what about Amazon? What if people were to use Amazon stock to buy Amazon products and they got a discount for using the Amazon stock? I'm not saying that this is the way things should be or they shouldn't be, but blockchain enables those types of transactions. And so I think they're worth talking about.
Well, to some extent. So let's clarify. A stock is, in my head, represents a security, where it is a contract between me and the issuing organization that is bound by some sort of rules, is bound by regulatory and everything. And generally speaking, I'm buying a stock for a percentage of future cash flows. Now, you can argue that, the derivatives market and a bunch of things have changed that, but most likely your traditional stock investing was I was investing a chunk into the company, and they would cash flow and they would yield a dividend. That's stocks 101. Now, a token economy is different from my perspective than a stock economy or than a stock issuance type thing, because when I buy a token, I'm buying, in most cases, a utility token. So maybe there's the whole concept of a security token. I know polymaths out there trying to do that, but let's just, narrow our things down to a utility token. So with a utility token, I am buying into an ecosystem or a platform, a protocol of some sort that gives me some utility, right? It's supposed to cause some change. And then there is a usage base of that may actually want me to go use it. And the whole appreciation side outside of speculation. So if I back out speculation, if we're looking at appreciation would come from some sort of limited supply and or hoarding mechanism that makes me want to hold on to the token based on whatever its characteristics are.
So the reason why I brought this up is you asked me, what do I envision for what's going to be happening in the future? And, I could see these types of situations existing where, people have a token for like walking their dog, people have a token for, getting their haircut. And, it's interesting to me to think about what that's going to mean for, people and users if these things are introduced to us and they start, becoming part of our normal lives. The technology is there. It can't permit it. It's just, our society and, our legal infrastructure going to catch up. and I am being called away.
Okay, you got to run. Sweet.
Yeah, I'm ready. And like, when are they coming in?
They're supposed to be starting at noon. So.
Oh shit. Okay. Thanks, man.
Alrighty. Well, sounds like you got to go. Blaine, great having you on. I bet we could probably keep talking for hours and hours and hours. I actually probably have 5 more things to ask you, but you got to go, and I want to respect your time. So thanks for being on. Great to meet you, and hopefully we'll be in touch. All right.
Yeah, I'll see you at some conferences in the near future.
Definitely. Talk to you. Oh, are you going to be at Token Fest this week?
Let's talk. Let's catch up over email. I don't have any.
Not a problem.
Next 2 weeks.
Alrighty.
LA guy. So yeah.
Okay. Hey, great meeting you. Talk to you later. Bye.